Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in to EduTech Asia. Earlier today, we have been focusing on themes of self-directed learning under the higher education team of blended learning. Now, we'll be moving our focus to digital assessments, something that many educators are really tuning into and are really looking into how to improvise as well as enhance the learning experience. Here with us today, we have our amazing panel of speakers. We have Dr. Malini, who will be our moderator for this panel. Before I pass on the time to this panel, if you have any questions for them, please feel free to post them under the live discussion questions tab. Now, without further ado, I would like to pass on the time to Dr. Malini, who is our moderator. Over to you, Dr. Malini.
Thank you, Jermaine. I'm sure that you're all looking forward to this exciting session and very timely session on digital assessments, especially not with the current landscape. Digital assessments and digital technology opens new possibilities and alternatives, but they do not come without questions. And this is where our esteemed panelists are here to debate and discuss these questions. And without further ado, I would like to start this session by asking the first question. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw technology accelerate at a breakneck pace. With the shifts it brought upon, teaching and learning and the way we are assessing our students have changed. Let's hear from our panelists on how the mode of assessment in their various institutions have changed. What are the types of digital assessments deployed at your various institutions? And is there a discipline which is more innovative than the other? So I would like to start with perhaps Bob first, then followed by Wajid and Pat.
Hi, good afternoon. So from UNSW, University of New South Wales in Sydney, like I'm sure so many other universities, first of all, what we did in the past was we had a lot of central final exams. So in 2019, we held 1,200 separate exams for courses. That included 180,000 individual sittings where people came into a traditional final examination room and then were invigilated and checked. In fact, the space we required was so big that we had to hire special rooms which weren't owned by the university every year in order to do these final exams. Of course, during the COVID-19, as of March onwards this year, we had to close and stop all those final examinations and instead pass those back to the faculties and the schools. We have 54 schools and 9 faculties to then run their own resolutions to begin with in the first term. So what was happening during that time was that software such as Moodle plugins was being used. We started experimenting with other INSPIRA, for example, Exam4, ExamSoft, Exam browser, Safe Browser, etc. We were also using Turnitin, etc. So we were using a lot of different things. It was no longer centralized. Then gradually, post term 2, and now we're into term 3, we've started to work much more centrally again. So as far as the question about the discipline, which discipline was the most innovative, I think that would probably be, in my experience, business, because what the Faculty of Business has done, and they have about 28,000 students there, is they stopped and rethought, why do they need exams? And if they need exams, how is that actually supporting the student learning? So they started to think and rethink, do we need to have these kind of terminal final exams, or can we find alternate ways of actually assessing whether students have or can evidence that they've achieved the learning outcomes that were set? So that's all I'll say at this point.
Thank you, Bob.
All right, right. So for me, this is Patrachart Komolkiti from Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. Okay, I'm responsible for the Learning Innovation Center, which is basically controlling how the technology is being used throughout the campus. So from the experience that I got, we start about the same time as Bob has mentioned, which is in about March. Okay, at that time, we were about to have the midterm exams of the second semester of our academic year, which basically it means that we will try to wrap up all the midterm exams, and then we would see how the final exam goes, right? Exactly as Bob mentioned, we have been looking for alternatives because we could not make sure that all the exams are fair and the integrity of the exam has to be held. Although unfortunately, in some cases, we ran into the problem because there were two factors that sort of forced us into basically handling exams somehow online. First factor is the number of exam takers, basically. Because we, for instance, our campus has an English class for our freshmen that turns out to have about 5,000 students there. So it seems to have no other options besides exam, because otherwise you cannot make sure that they are fair. Because if you rely on other techniques, then it means it depends on the assessor, basically, right? So that has to somehow be handled. And fortunately, it went through, because although we used various techniques to try to invigilate those, using Zoom, using various techniques, and then that went through. Right? The other factors that also came into play was actually about their professional license, because for us, in order to graduate with the approval of the professional, like for instance, the medical license or dentistry license, they actually has a saying in that in their assessment, there has to be some sort of exam, so that there is no way to bypass those. But fortunately, for those especially for medical exams, we already had some application in place, because we had thought of that. How can we make sure that these are being distributed over throughout the country? Our country is relatively big comparing to other countries in this region, except Australia, of course. But in order to go throughout the country, then it means it has to be online somehow. So we already prepared for that. We had an application called Exam Plus, okay, which is currently in Southeast Asia, we believe to be the only application that is approved by Apple App Store to have the ability to lock the screen and so on. So that is halfway there. So we already have something that is somewhat innovative that would allow exam taker to be online. So I will stop it here for now.
Thank you, Pat. How about you, Wajid?
I'm Wajid Hussain. I'm a Director of Quality Accreditation at Islamic University in Medina. So basically, when we started with the COVID lockdown in March, the Ministry of Education Saudi Arabia has mandated all students to have digital distance learning. And what that actually created was a kind of, I would say, a state of shock situation, because many schools and programs were actually not ready to deal with online assessments. As Bob and even Pat talked about, we were dealing with standardized, centralized exams, a certain template of exams with midterms, assignments, and a distribution of formative assessments, summative assessments. Especially in Saudi Arabia, we have to deal with course outcomes that are formulated, that fulfill the national qualification frameworks, and the ministry basically evaluates school performances based on these course outcomes results. So that became the big challenge, because with digital assessments and distributing course modules and curriculum, alignment to course outcomes and assessing those, the credibility of assessments and using tools, bandwidth, network became a huge issue. Like we had millions of students getting onto the network, and so Blackboard network actually crashed. And we had other tools, like in our disciplines of engineering, we used eval tools. So eval tools had the additional capability of embedded assessments. And because of this capability, whatever online assessments could be created, they were automatically linked to outcomes, rubrics, and facilitated that part of alignment, which is the biggest issue of digital assessments. With that said, I think what we are still looking into right now is the right kind of technologies, and it's still an experimental stage. And there's a lot of research and a lot of testing going on as we speak with many schools and programs. And I would leave it to the next question at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Wajid. So one of the common threads that has risen from these comments are the shift from centralized exams and template-based and quick move to digital. And that's very evident in the comments from our panelists. So I think my next question related to that would be, with this change, how has it impacted faculty and students? Are they ready? And are we getting the best from the learners with this change? It's inevitable that we had to make this change, but are we getting the best from the learners? And do they need more support? And what type of support do they need? Perhaps we could start with Wajid this time and move on to Pat and then Bob.
Yes, the biggest issue I think that we faced was standards of assessments. And students, of course, when you talk about assessments, you have to take into consideration their teaching strategy using digital technology. So there were issues with methods of teaching, and especially, how differentiated instruction would happen, and maybe blended learning would happen. So these were real challenges, faculty faced. We deal with holistic learning. It talks about 3 domains of learning, and everybody knows about Bloom's models of cognitive, psychomotor, affective, especially the scientific disciplines. Dealing with labs and projects became a real issue. We even had industrial courses that we did online. We looked at simulations, virtual tools, virtual labs, but we could not get the level of expertise and practice that we want students to get in order to qualify. So what the government did is they mandated a 25% max requirement when students could still come in person and do practical work with social distancing, all of that. So there were areas we could not actually fully address, even with digital technology. The technology is not up there yet. The other major issue is credibility of exams. Now, unfortunately, what we saw in a few terms is a whole lot of green result, which means that students' performances somehow improved remarkably. And that was a concern. How do you make sure everything is credible? We had faculty members turn on cameras sometimes during exams. And we had another technology where students could actually write up their work, sign in a second using any app, post their work as uploaded soft copy documents. We had different tools with time-bound questions and shuffled up questions. We used all kinds of methods, but I think this is an area which still needs exploration, and we need to make sure how exams could be credible and how we could take care of the other domains of learning besides cognitive, and how could we blend different strategies into digital technology. So this is an area which is relatively being explored as we speak.
Right. So from my side, let me split it into 2 parts, the faculty members and the students, right? For the faculty members, the first thing that we have to look for is that they have to redesign everything, because once we cannot assess in the same way that we used to, then it means that the whole thing has to be redesigned. So those has to be somehow conveyed to the instructor, because we have to face it to the fact that most of the instructors were not aware that just by moving the instruction from in classroom to Zoom or some other platform, it doesn't mean it can be conducted the same way. So you have to redesign the whole thing and somehow involve and integrate the assessment throughout, so that you will not emphasize too much on the final exam, because the platform and by itself may not be necessarily be similar, right? So that is one of the first thing. Now, those technology could help to make sure that the exam integrity is there. Second, since Wajid has already mentioned that if for the cognitive domain, then okay, you can use exams, but there are other domains as well that that could be involved. For instance, we have some school about performing arts, those could not be easily, of course, accessed by using exam. They used to have some performance, but now since we are under lockdown, then you cannot simply ask a student to dance in their bedroom because the locations are not there and it's not safe either, right? Those have to also be somehow figured out, right? So that is from the point of view of the faculty members. From the student point of view, in fact, this is one of the things that we have to think hard and long, because even though Chulalongkorn University is considered to be #1 university in Thailand, but it doesn't mean that all our students are, financially secure. It means that we are the public university. We accept many students who may not have the full financial support from various places. So we cannot assume that they have all the equipments to take exams, because some students may have 3 laptops in their disposal, but some students only have like some smartphone, which is not fair for them to be able to handle the exam at the same time, right? So that has to also be considered from the student point of view, that they have to be fair, and also the platform has to help, because if the platform cannot guarantee integrity, actually many students complain that they do not trust, because they want their ability to be shown. Otherwise, the result of the exam cannot be trusted, basically. So those are the 2 things that you have to consider on this part.
Thank you, Pat. Moving on to you, Bob. Can I have your thoughts, please?
Yes, I absolutely agree with what the other panelists have said. And one thing that I want to emphasize really is both staff and students. And when I'm talking about staff, it's teachers, but it's also the teacher support staff. It's the para-pedagogues, the educational developers, etc., that are helping the academics develop and teach. The teaching assistants and the sessional staff need a much deeper understanding of how assessments change when you put them into a digital environment. And this is not the same from one discipline to another. So the changes are quite large. It's not just a case of shoveling the same exam questions, for example, from a face-to-face environment into an online environment. It just doesn't work. The technology actually changes the game. And so one of the key things that we're working on and trying to tackle is try to capacity build staff and students understanding of digital literacies. Now, this is quite complicated. It means that we need to guide them step by step to realize that they are working in a very different environment. So they need to think very differently about their assessment. So for teachers, that's really interesting, because that means we can help them leverage and rethink why they're assessing their students. And I think in the kind of longer term, this is going to be one of the really big positives that will come out of the COVID-19 experience from our point of view. I think the other thing to recognize, this is not just in my university, but it's very common across all universities in Australia, is when we collect evaluations from students, when we collect their feedback on their experiences as students in our courses, the one group of things that is always said the most in qualitative statements in a negative way is that students are most concerned about the quality of the assessments and the quality and frequency of the feedback that they receive. Students always want more feedback, but also assessments need to be more closely tied to learning outcomes in obviously in any kind of outcomes-based curriculum. They need to be much closer to it, and actually also need to be much more authentic as far as possible, move examinations and questions and activities to be much more authentic. And I think this knock-on effect, I think, is going to be very positive for us in terms of improving the quality of our education for our students, our student experience, and also for the quality and improvement of the assessments and the need for that time. The one other thing I'd want to emphasize from our experience of the lockdown, we've tried lots of technologies like a lot of other institutions. One thing is very clear. There will never be a single technology that will resolve all of our problems. We're piloting and experimenting with things like IN4OBE, but it is not going to be the solution for a lot of what we do. We're using our learner management systems to do it. We're using Microsoft and their environment suite. They're not going to be the solution per se. We're going to continue to need a whole array of technology solutions that will meet different discipline needs and signature pedagogies.
Thank you, Bob. I couldn't agree more with what you just said, because there's no single technology that is going to help solve these problems. You're looking at multiple types of technologies, and that brings back to the question of budgets at the end of the day. You know, some institutions are able to afford it and some institutions are not able to afford it because a lot of these have been unbudgeted for. Now, we spoke about faculty, we spoke about students. We have another stakeholder, which are the accreditors and accreditation bodies. So perhaps, Wajid, you would like to take this question. Are there challenges posed to accreditors and accreditation bodies with this change? How are they coping with this change?
That's a very important question. In fact, internationally right now, we have accreditation agencies like the International Engineering Alliance or AACSB for Business or Nursing Associations, ABED. All of them unanimously have announced virtual audits. Nobody for the next upcoming accreditation cycles is going to travel, is going to visit campus. They're not going to look into these kind of protocols anymore, and it could possibly change forever. So with that said, it brings up a whole bunch of challenges. I just talked to one of my colleagues and they had about 4 virtual reviews this week and another bunch of reviews last week. So they're using video tours. Usually in accreditation visits, they have interviews with faculty, students. They look at display materials as objective evidence, evaluations of students, programs. Outcomes are again the key standards for quality checks. So with that said, the biggest challenge for accreditation agencies, I mean, you could replace physical visits with video tours and all of that, but it is evaluation of digital data. That's where credibility of the data is going to be a key challenge. 95%, you could say a ballpark figure of schools and programs internationally are manually doing all of this work. We are experts internationally in this area, and we have a bunch of publications and a lot of training, workshops, and education that we do for many schools throughout the world. So this shift of digitization is not just for education, but the collection and reporting of data, and to make it credible and to have it aligned to outcomes would be the biggest challenge of this decade. And for accreditation agencies, the training, the infrastructure, the technology to be able to go in and do those credible qualifications would be the real challenge. It's no more manual display materials. It has to go back from a program all the way to student record. And it has to go to what we call as the continuous quality improvement for all of these agencies. So they have to look at the flow and the history of all that happening. So you need the right kind of technology. There is technology available, and it's going to be a mix and match of different technologies, and that's the challenge we're going to be facing now.
Thank you, Wajid. It's a huge challenge, and it's something that accreditation bodies and also regulators in those programs that are highly regulated will need to look into. Now, moving on with all this change, and from these comments that the three of y'all have made, it looks as if we jumped into these changes, and these changes have really fast-tracked, and we are far ahead. Because of COVID, we have moved at a very fast pace. But you know, we need to take into consideration the workload of faculty with this change. You know, there's I hear grouses that you know faculty have to do a lot more, and they also have to cope with all this mindset change, and also some of them had to cope with technology, you know, adapting technology. So with this future of digital assessments, we should take into consideration the workload of faculty. Do you think that in the future we could do away with exam halls? Could we do away with students writing exam papers? And can we adapt a blended approach where some of these exams can be automated, especially those you know that had large scale students and distributed across different disciplines, common courses that are distributed against you know especially first year courses in universities. Pat mentioned 5,000 students. So is there a future where we will be adapting a more automated approach after this post-COVID era? Can I have your thoughts, please? Perhaps, Bob, you want to start?
I think it's definitely what we are thinking about at UNSW. We are looking to see how we can reduce the emphasis that a lot of our courses have had on the examination, the traditional examination type, particularly the final examinations. Are there alternates? And we're planning and working to gradually phase out the kind of traditional examination system. So I think we're certainly trying to move that way, but it's going to take us a long time. It's not going to be something that we can do instantaneously. There is no quick fix on this, but I would say over the next few years, over the next 5 years, I would see the number of sittings, annual sittings for examinations in my university being reduced from 180,000 down to probably 80 or 60,000.
Thank you, Bob. Can we move on to you, Pat?
All right. Yeah, I agree from my side as well that I think the number of sitting has to be reduced dramatically, but it also depends on how the instructor is designing the whole thing, as I mentioned at the beginning. Because if you plan to reduce the importance of the final exam, then it means you have to have some other way of assessment. Then if we redesign the whole thing, some courses are possible, of course, and even better because exam were actually, as Malini mentioned, was the easiest way and have the fewest amount of workload for the faculty members because they don't have to do anything else. But other methods, of course, they may require extra work from the instructor, which means that has to be on a different mindset. And then it has to come back to the outcome, as Wajid mentioned. That is the key thing that you have to keep to make sure that the quality is there, right? But in fact, the outcome could be assessed in various ways, not just by the exam. So we can learn a lot actually from the technology that we have had for so many years, which is the massive open online courses or MOOCs, right? Since we already have MOOCs throughout, then although those are not as heavily assessed as other courses because they are supposedly for the mass popularity. But we can learn a lot from there, and if we use those technology, then we of course can use the automated tools in order to grade and assess all those things. So blended learning is perhaps considered to be the future from my point of view, because then we can mix between the MOOCs, which is fully automated, and something that has to be conducted with the face-to-face, because we believe that by MOOCs alone, you may not achieve the outcome that we expect, but by doing face-to-face, then we are facing with both the problem of health as well as in terms of the future works, which we want to extend our courses through a worldwide, basically.
It's interesting, Pat, that you mentioned MOOCs because a lot of providers, a lot of institutions have turned to MOOCs in the wake of the pandemic to see how they could learn from the MOOCs or how they could use the MOOCs as supplemental material. and you know, the blended mode would be a way forward, where you mix and match. So very interesting comment. Can we move to Wajid? What are your thoughts with regard to this?
Yeah, I think there's a requirement for a lot of education to happen at both national level and school level. We have this thought process right now internationally that we are trying to look into skills and competencies, and examinations and degrees somehow they don't give all the information that industry needs and you know, jobs want. So we have World Economic Forum reports which give you top jobs and top skills. So we have to have this movement out of this mass examination centers and you know, students piling up in a large number of and then giving those exams and you know, processing those. So we have to move out from mass testing to individualized testing. And in fact, when we talk about outcomes, what we do is we spread out using specific performance indicators, specific outcomes, distribute them throughout the curriculum, and we collect several hundred data points for each student to create a digital scorecard. So education into what are the innovative solutions in the digital arena, these have to be highlighted with national agencies and even schools throughout the world to give them options. Another a big effort with RMSSR in the UK, they're processing billions of exams annually. It's even in remote towns in India, they've basically coordinated with RMSSR, and they churn out thousands of results in a couple of days. And it's remote marking. The technology that we are talking about is integrating outcomes with barcoded exam sheets. It doesn't have to have a lot of students coming together in one place. It could be uploaded documents, you know, and these barcoded exam sheets could be read easily by instructors who are remote and could be graded in very fraction of the amounts of time which otherwise spent, and the results could be available, tied up and aligned to outcomes. It's actually latest technology. It's not implemented yet, but this is what's in the talks when you talk about digital assessment, mass testing, individualized testing. So we're also doing a bunch of work in this arena, and we have to move to skills and competencies eventually, and digital scorecards where a hiring company could look into, this is the skill I need, let's say digital circuit analysis, and get the students that they want and hire them on campus. So that's the goal of exams basically. So this is my small input for this question.
Very interesting, and thanks, Wajid. It's very interesting that you brought the thought about digital scorecards. It has been experimented in the US based on competency-based education and digital skill and the skills set that need to be developed and how the students have acquired that skills, and that is recorded in a digital scorecard. And digital assessments actually allow for that. Because this data can be captured. And that brings me to the next question, and a very interesting point that you brought up in your comment just now on data. So with digital assessments, you get a footprint. You get a first-hand view of what a student is doing, because all this is captured. So it brings you to the use of big data and machine learning and analytics. And just now you mentioned Blackboard. So Blackboard also has got Blackboard analytics. So so my question will be, using big data and analytics, you can see a steady growth in the trajectory of digital assessment. And with COVID exploding and forcing us to move in that trajectory, do you see the use of analytics? How do you see the growth of learning analytics? Where faculty is concerned and where institutions are concerned? Do you think that institutions are going to invest in learning analytics? Can I have your thoughts, Wajid?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was just waiting. So yes, in fact, we have institutions in the US and other places. They're spending millions for this data, and they want to get the feedback on how students are doing, what's the job requirements, and all. Just yesterday, I had a conversation with a top director of the Ministry of Education. They want to align the whole country based on skills and competencies. That's what the European Union is also doing right now. The misinterpretation or misinformation out there is big data is something that somehow come up with COVID-19. No. For example, big data is big in medical diagnostics. There's no hospital that doesn't have thousands of data points for the thousands of patients. In the same way, travel tourism. Somehow, unfortunately, education had been left behind, and we don't have these data points for each student. We, in our programs, we have millions of documents in the cloud. It's not just data points, we have evidence. We have documentary evidence, we have proofs, we have videos. Basically, we have used certain tools. Now, talking about Blackboard doesn't have that capability. They have analytics based on whatever you feed in, but Blackboard doesn't have embedded assessments, which is the future. So embedded assessments in this last decade, it has been the revolution of the century, you could say that. So whatever is routine assessment, it gets captured. And we, in higher education, every student, when they graduate, they have hundreds of skills, which they mature, and it's a progressive learning as we go. So all of that is captured. So when we look into a student, let's say that in our advising systems, we have a student with some underperforming student, but we have some green areas. So with the digital scorecard and with big data, we can focus on some inherent skills which a student has a strong skill and direct him for a successful career future. Most students may not have a successful career future because they're embarking on areas which are not their inherent strengths. So we are able to identify this with accurate measurements, with accurate methodology and technology. We can pinpoint and tell a student that, look here, we see these green areas in you. This is God-gifted talents in you. You should go in this area and you will be top of the line. You see, so big data is always there. Unfortunately, we haven't harnessed the right technology. We don't use the right methodology. Even the approach and outcomes is not very clearly understood by majority of schools. They use it just for accreditation, fill up the forms. They don't use authentic OBE, which goes down to specific discipline, topic related, measurements and hybrid rubrics. All of that can be captured with big data, and it's a requirement. I would say it's a must. It's not understood. We think that COVID has brought this up, but COVID is just exposing our weaknesses. Big data is required now in today's world if we want to move forward.
Thank you, Wajid. Very apt. And you're right. And digital assessments, because it's digital, it allows for that footprints to be captured, even for institutions who have not even embarked on it. A question to Pat. What would you think would be the future trajectory of digital assessments?
Right. For this future, I think it would involve, as Wajid mentioned, lots of data. Okay, so that would be the part of the thing, because as Dr. Malini mentioned about the footprint, it leaves lots of trail right now that hasn't been shown or captured before. Right now, we could see a lot of things. We already actually had a few examples being handled internally by ourselves, because in the digital exam that we have had, we found some cases in which the instructor found something that is not usual. So we could actually tackle all those trails and see what has happened. And in fact, it turns out that we can figure out something went wrong over there and investigate it further. So those are actually quite important, because we are now in the realm that we haven't had before. And digital technology could capture all the footprint, as you mentioned. Now, however, it involves many other things that we have to capture, because first thing first, when we talk about assessment, most of the people tend to think just only about exam, but it's not just those, right? We are talking about how can we make sure that in other realms beside the cognitive domain, about the psychomodel, about other things. How can you make sure that you capture those things? Okay. For instance, we have School of Medicine. How can we make sure that the students are doing the CPR correctly, or students are doing procedure correctly? Those are still require some different models in order to assess them, that whether or not they are competent to become a doctor, right? Or even some other things that we have to think of. Not only about the digital assessment, but also about the directions of how should we develop, because there are going to be many occupancies that are going to disappear, right? For instance, I think airline is the clearest example right now. They are in a danger of disappearing, because at this moment, maybe we do not need that many pilots or many flight crew, basically, right? So in that point of view, then the digital assessment is going to become a major part. But we do not have, as Bob mentioned, one model fit all. We have to figure out on which tool are going to be suitable, and that is going to become a big gap that we have to really fill.
Thank you, Pat. Bob?
It's a really interesting area. We have quite a large team actually developing dashboards. So we have data analytics teams that are looking at different aspects of various things. And that enables us to develop these quite simple dashboard health checks in a number of areas. Let me give you one example. One example is in curriculum. This is very close to my heart as a professor of curriculum. In an outcomes-based curriculum, the connections between the university strategies, program learning outcomes, course learning outcomes, content of the course, the assessments, and the evaluation, etc., is obviously extremely important. We use a particular model for that. We call it the Integrated Curriculum Framework. We also have particular frameworks to help in course development and assessment development, whether it is digital or not. It doesn't matter. It's pedagogy first. It's looking at educational models first. But in particular, what we're doing is we're making use of a particular application that we've recently brought in called Eclipse, which enables us to do more measured curriculum mapping. So in other words, when courses and programs are developed, they are required to complete a quite complex set of templates. And that data then provides us with that kind of connectivity between all the components of the courses. We're now looking at how we can not only connect curriculum mapping with student satisfaction. So you can see whether I'm talking beyond just digital assessment. I'm talking beyond assessment. I'm talking about the entirety of the student experience. So the data analytics is huge, and I'd agree with all other comments that are made by the panelists. And certainly, we're very strongly moving that way. There is, again, no simple solution. In medicine, for example, we're looking at different times to assess. So we're looking not so much at assessing course by course in the digital world. We're looking at grouping courses up to a year of courses and then assessing the students. So we're looking at how we can maximize authentic assessments across a range of courses, and how the students have the capability of using all those different course expertise that they've got in order to come up with some solution, which of course is supremely important in, say, undergraduate medicine. You have to have that. And on the other front, in order to document what the students have done, the students actually keep e-portfolios of all the work they've done, so that we can actually monitor that. But we're bringing that in with data analytics as well. So it's a really big area, but the diagnostic side of it is very interesting. We're tying in, or starting to think about tying in, not only the data we're collecting, what I've mentioned, but also about the student comments about their learning experience and that of their teachers as well. So can we actually make kind of like health checks on whether the students feel they're getting a good experience, and in what way we can improve that by developing these dashboards.
Very interesting, Bob. And I'm sure something like that would entail a whole new discussion opening up, because, you know, you're talking about a very integrated kind of an approach, quite holistic. I'll be interested to find out the findings of this. There's a question from one of our participants. Let me ask the question. What are the best practices and tools to assess humanities-related subjects, literature, history, and jurisprudence? So, interesting question. Who would like to take that question? Bob, would you like to take that question?
Yes, certainly. I think with humanities per se, I think during this close down generally, they've done pretty well with this, because the emphasis for a lot of humanities has not been on that final examination. A lot of it has been on continuing assessment or a formative assessment that and providing lots and lots of feedback. So I think in terms of best practice, although I don't like using the term best practice, I prefer to use the term good practice, because there is no single best practice that fits humanities or any other disciplines. But we have lots of examples of excellent practice, of good practices that can be shared, and then people can learn from each other. I think that certainly in humanities, one of the areas that we've been particularly looking at is, I know we're going to be talking about this a bit later, is around academic integrity and about, you know, digital assessments, and then whether digital assessments actually creates new opportunities for student cheating and things like that. I think with the humanities, working on developing smaller chunks of assessments and very small final assessments in a digital world, we found ways of certainly reducing opportunities for cheating. And I think that's a good practice. So actually in the humanities side, they've done that well by having lots of small chunks of assessments, maybe leading to a larger assessment, and avoiding that final examination as much as possible. And I would say generally across our humanities, literature, history, jurisprudence, that's what we've been doing.
Thanks, Bob. Pat, and do you have any further thoughts on this?
All right. For the humanities, I think you have to look into what domain that they are going to build, right? If we simply look at the affective domain or the regular domain, then it means that you are looking at assessing that at the application level, or synthesis level, or that kind of level, right? Basically. So if hopefully you're not only assessing them just for the remembering or simply understanding, but you have to dig a little bit deeper. Fortunately, I think lately for those domains, there have been a lot of discussion of what kind of digital tools that you can use to assess those, right? In the new technology, if you're talking about the analysis or synthesis, you can write blogs. You are asking students to write blogs of this stuff. So those could be done on the platform in which the instructor can keep track of those and progress throughout the year. So it's not necessarily just sitting in the final exam and relying simply on their memory, but rather they can use lots of tools being available, and blog is something that hopefully is become something normal in which the instructor can use. Right? So these are some of the things that actually there are many other tools that I think the person who questioned this could dig through, and the keyword is simply digital tool for assessment for in the new Bloom's taxonomy. So that is the keyword. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. There's another question, interesting, on faculty. So the question, if I read the question, it says, what training efforts are required for faculty and students to facilitate changes in mindsets and behaviors when it comes to the change of assessment format? So it's really about mindset and behavior change that we're talking about. Who would like to take this question? Opening up to the floor.
I'm happy to take a start of it. Yeah, I think, yeah, it comes back to the point I made a bit earlier about digital literacies and digital assessment literacies. I think we need to work on with both students and with teachers. We have to kind of develop those more. I mentioned that we have certain pedagogical frameworks that we use that are actually embedded in our policies and procedures and guidelines right across the university. And so any new program and any new course has to follow this and show how they are articulating. So for example, with the integrated curriculum framework, which is an outcomes-based framework, the connections between all the components of the program and the course, etc., and the assessments. We have other models in looking at a digital uplift and how the new technologies can help us to develop quality programs and courses, etc., and be kind of evaluated with that. So that is the starting point. So the starting point for us has not been to look at technology solutions, but to take a step back and to think about what are the education requirements, what are the student learning experiences that are necessary, and then what's the best way of providing that in this kind of strange world we live in this kind of lockdown way. And that's the guidance. Every discipline, every faculty is actually coming to terms with this in different ways. And I think that's a really good way to work. I'm sure that we're just not going to be the same in a few months' time. When eventually we go back, and we're gradually starting to go back, we're not going to go back to the old days. We're going to take a firm grip and move on, take into account the experiences we've had over these 7 or 8 months.
Very apt comment, Bob. I couldn't agree more with the fact that we're not going to go back to the old norm. We're going to take all these learnings and we're going to move forward, and it's going to be a better learning experience as we go on, because we've learned a lot in these last 8 months. Moving on, there's another question from Citi. So this question, I'm just going to summarize. It's a long question, but it's a question related to industrial projects. You know, how would you totally redesign assessment to move to an authentic approach, you know, as an alternative for industrial projects? What else can we do to assess the students, because it's still unsafe to send a student out? So in a year's time, with proper planning, how can we do industrial projects differently? Anyone would like to take this question?
I could.
Wajid?
Maybe. Yeah, we just published a paper for the IEEE Education Society TAIL 2020 conference in Japan. And it's about industrial training courses, a challenge during the COVID-19 pandemic. So basically we have reviewed this. I've actually managed an industrial training course, and unfortunately, the psychomotor and affective domain, the psychomotor and affective domain components are not going to be saturated in terms of learning for distance learning options, because they cannot get the industrial environment, the international quality standards, the diverse, multidisciplinary culture of working in teams, the exposure to the tools and technology that the industry have to offer. They would not be able to get those. But yes, from the cognitive perspective, we can try to achieve with, again, tools, virtual labs, hands-on simulation and projects. So we have done that. And we also use something which we call as, remote reports, in which these reports and questionnaires, we target to each of these course learning outcomes, whether it's teamwork or whether it's problem solving or design. And we direct students, step by step into all of these activities, but we could not get the same level of experience what's available at the industry. That's just not going to be substituted, unfortunately. And it will take a long time for something to happen, it probably has to be something produced by industries themselves to cope up with students missing that education, and provide maybe virtual tours and actual programs wherein students integrate from a distance into the industry environment.
Thanks, Wajid. Perhaps also the solution to that will be a virtual simulated experience in a virtual environment. So they get to practice in a simulated environment, but it's risk-free in many aspects. Moving on, another question, seeking panelists' advice on assessing soft skills, competencies. So this person is asking about how do you assess soft skills and the competencies related to soft skills. Can I open up to the panelists, Pat, perhaps?
Sure. I think the first thing that we have to actually even start questioning ourselves is that with the soft skill, what was the definitions and what is the definition now, right? Because basically soft skill was about collaborating among your peers. But right now, if we are in the current pandemic world, then it means the new way of collaborations, right? You cannot simply just fly there and talk. You have to talk online, right? We are doing right now. So basically, this is another set of skills that you have to think about too, right? So first is talking about the soft skill, then we have to actually update the definition of what we want to assess them, right? And second, the way to assess this, I think it are going to be hidden in the project. Then it means it's come back to the design of your course, right? If your course or your content is supposed to build up the soft skill, then it means it has to be embedded in your instruction or in your assignment there, that you have to somehow allow the student to be able to work together or collaborating among the projects, right? So in that point of view, if we adapt or change or adjust the definitions of, right? If we adjust the definitions first, then we would have a better idea on, okay, with the definition of the soft skill, then what kind of assignment are we going to give them so that we can assess them. But of course, big data is going to be the big help, because as the analytics in the backdoor would allow you to be able to see the trail and how collaboration are actually being done just beside student being able, okay, I work together with them. But now with the collaboration, you actually see the activities, see the trails, see the digital footprint of those. And those are going to be a very big help in actually assessing them.
I can add a small point here, if you allow me to. For teamwork, we have teamwork assessment instruments. You could have a team contract. You could have team roles defined. You could have team meeting schedules. We have rubrics for all of these. And we also have rubrics for listening to peers, supervisors, following up on actions and peer evaluations. So all of that is done online now. So we do it completely, the full spectrum.
Thank you, Wajid. We will need to wrap up now. So one final thought from each of you in terms of the opportunities you think that digital assessment would lead us to. So maybe perhaps Bob?
Okay, I think this whole area of academic integrity, I think, has really come out to the fore in terms of contract cheating through digital diploma mills, etc. in this period of time. Does it mean that digital assessments have increased the opportunities for students to cheat? Or does it mean that this has provided us with a closer opportunity to actually identify and evidence the cheating that maybe was already happening in the more traditional kind of face-to-face environment? So I think this is the one thing. What we're doing is we're noting that there has been, a high increase in those that are caught in cheating through digital assessment. And it's getting us to start to think, well, okay, is it the student's fault? Mostly not. It's actually most to do with the assessment design. that if we actually design the assessment, which is more truly around evidencing what students have actually learnt, in other words, moving as far as possible to more authentic learning, then that's going to resolve a lot of the inverted commas cheating problems that we have. So I think that's one kind of key wrap-up thing that I would like to say. I think that's really important. Maybe because I've talked so long on that, I should stop.
Thank you, Bob. We have 1 more minute. So Pat, a quick one in terms of opportunities.
All right. I think there are still many things that the digital tools has to be redesigned so that it fits with what we actually need. But in the meantime, instead of just waiting for technologies, I think the important part is, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have to redesign the whole thing, the whole course, the whole instructions, so that it would allow the assessment to occur and utilize the existing tools so that we can actually track the student throughout and do not just simply rely on exams. And it's a good opportunity because we have been trying to do this for a long time, but still COVID simply forced us to be there. And right now, most of the instructors, fortunately, have started seeing that they cannot use a similar technique that they have done before. But still, there is a lot to learn and change the mindset so that everyone agrees on the new principle here.
Thank you, Pat. I apologize that we can't proceed further as it's already time's up, and I will have to hand back the session to Jermaine. But before that, I would like to thank all the panelists for a really very insightful discussion. And it has been a great session moderating this panel discussion. So over to you, Jermaine.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malini. I think this has really been a very enlightening session. I see many comments coming in from the chat, and thanking the panelists so much for sharing with us your insights as well as perspectives, especially when it comes to digital assessments, as this is the way that we are moving forward now in the higher ed space. So if you'd like to connect with the speakers further, feel free to send them a connection request on Swapcard. Just go over to the speakers tab, send them a connection request, and you can even hop on a virtual meeting with them. So without further ado, I'd like to say thank you once again to everyone tuning into this session, as well as to our speakers who have shared their time with us and shared with us their perspectives. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.